The morning sun cast long shadows across my 15-acre property as I stood on the back porch, steaming coffee, warming my hands against the early spring chill. This land had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather had purchased it back in 1952. My father had expanded the main house in the 70s, and I had spent my childhood exploring every inch of these acres before inheriting it 12 years ago. The property stretched from the 2-lane county road at the front all the way back to the edge of Millerton State Forest, with rolling pastures giving way to a large open field near the back that bordered the tree line. I took a deep breath of clean country air and savored the silence. That silence was one of the main reasons I had chosen to stay here after my parents passed. The property sat about 5 miles outside of town, far enough to escape the noise but close enough for convenience. The only sounds this morning were birdsong, the distant lowing of cattle from the Henderson place half a mile east, and the soft rustle of tall grass in the back field as the breeze moved through it. My eyes lingered on that back field. It held special memories. As a child, I had built forts there, played endless games of tag with neighborhood kids, and later helped my father with small farming projects. Now, twice a year, that field served a different purpose. As a former volunteer firefighter, I knew the importance of proper training. After a knee injury forced my early retirement from the department after 15 years of service, I had offered the back portion of my property to the Millerton Volunteer Fire Department for their biannual live training exercises. The arrangement benefited everyone. The department got a safe, isolated location for their training, and I maintained strong ties with the service that protected our community. Chief Rodriguez always made sure they left the property exactly as they found it, often even better. Last autumn, after their training session, they had helped clear some fallen trees from the previous month's storm as a thank you gesture. The distant sound of construction equipment broke through my peaceful reflection. Another housing development was going up just beyond my eastern property line. The once tight-knit rural community of Millerton had been changing rapidly over the past few years. Urban sprawl from the city 40 miles south had finally reached us, bringing with it city people who seemed to view our countryside as nothing more than cheap land and quaint scenery. Mrs. Abernathy, whose family had farmed the adjacent property for even longer than mine had been here, stopped by just last week to complain about her new neighbors. They had filed noise complaints about her rooster and requested she move her compost pile because the occasional smell offended them. "These city folks," she had said, shaking her head. "They move to the country for the fresh air and open space, then try to make it just like the subdivision they left behind." I set my empty coffee mug on the porch railing and checked my watch. I needed to drive into town for supplies before starting work on the fence line. The eastern border of my property needed reinforcing, especially now with new neighbors who probably had little understanding of property boundaries or rural customs. Little did I know that this peaceful morning would be one of the last before my land became the battleground for a confrontation that would test the limits of my patience and ultimately deliver a lesson in rural justice that no one in our community would soon forget. 3 days later, I was walking the property boundary, checking the condition of my fence posts along the eastern edge. The new development had brought increased foot traffic near my land, and I wanted to ensure my boundaries were clearly marked. I had just rounded the corner toward the back field when something caught my eye. A flash of bright blue against the tree line, something that definitely did not belong there. I stopped, shielding my eyes from the late afternoon sun. The spot where the blue object stood was well within my property line, not even close to the boundary. Frowning, I changed direction and headed toward the tree line. As I got closer, the blue shape took form. It was a tent. Not a small hiking tent, but a large family-sized camping tent complete with an awning extension. Around it were camping chairs, a portable table, and what looked like a small generator humming quietly. A campsite on my property, without my permission. As I approached, a woman emerged from the tent. She appeared to be in her early 50s, with highlighted blonde hair cut in a sharp, angled bob. She wore expensive-looking hiking clothes that seemed too clean and new to have seen much actual hiking. When she noticed me, she straightened up and plastered a tight smile on her face. "Good afternoon," I said, keeping my tone civil despite my confusion. "I am the owner of this property. May I ask what you are doing here?" The woman widened her smile, though it did not reach her eyes. "Oh, hello there. I am just setting up a little camping spot. The area is perfect, right at the edge of the wilderness." "This is private property," I explained, gesturing around us. "My private property. This is not public camping land." She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I cleared this with the neighborhood association. They said this back area is designated for community use." I blinked in surprise. There is no neighborhood association here. This is rural property, not a subdivision. This entire area belongs to me, has been in my family for generations. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I could see her assessing me, recalculating her approach. Well, clearly there has been some miscommunication. The realtor showing properties in the new development said this was community land. Your realtor was mistaken. This is 15 acres of private property. I pointed to the posted signs visible along the fence line. As you can see, it is clearly marked. When I directly asked her to pack up and leave, her demeanor changed completely. The smile vanished, replaced by a cool stare. "Actually," she said, pulling out her phone and navigating to a website, "I have researched this thoroughly. According to camping rights in this state, temporary residence is permitted for up to 30 days before you can legally remove me." She thrust the phone toward me, showing a webpage about camping regulations that appeared to refer to state park lands, not private property. "Those regulations do not apply to private property," I said firmly. "This is not a state park or public land. This is my home." She crossed her arms. "I understand you think that, but adverse possession laws exist for a reason. Unused land should not sit empty when people need spaces to enjoy nature." The audacity of her claim left me momentarily speechless. Her camping equipment was extensive and clearly arranged for a lengthy stay. A luxury SUV was partially hidden among the trees, loaded with supplies. This was not a simple misunderstanding. This was a deliberate attempt to establish some kind of foothold on my property. I could tell from the gleam in her eyes that this was not her first confrontation, nor would it be her last. This was a woman who made a hobby of pushing boundaries until they broke. She had targeted my land specifically, and she had no intention of leaving without a fight. The next morning, I called Sheriff Miller. John Miller had been sheriff of our county for nearly 20 years. He had been a friend of my father, and we had worked alongside each other during my time with the volunteer fire department. If anyone could help resolve this situation quickly and peacefully, it would be John. He arrived just after noon, his patrol car kicking up dust as it made its way down my long driveway. I met him at the front of the house and explained the situation as we walked toward the back field. When we reached the tree line, I was shocked to see how much the campsite had expanded overnight. What had been a single tent with some chairs had grown to include string lights hung between trees, a portable toilet partially concealed by a colorful privacy screen, and several lawn ornaments stuck into the ground as if marking territory. Garden gnomes and pink flamingos now stood like sentries around what was clearly meant to be a semi-permanent installation. Sheriff Miller leaned against his patrol car, hat in hand, shaking his head as he surveyed the elaborate setup. The woman, who had introduced herself simply as Ms. Parker, though I had begun thinking of her as Karen in my head, emerged from her tent with a look of practiced innocence. "She is definitely trespassing, no question about that," Sheriff Miller confirmed quietly. "But the court process to remove her could take weeks, especially with how backed up the system is right now. Judge Wilson is out on medical leave, and his replacement is only handling cases 2 days a week." Karen strutted around her campsite, performatively ignoring our presence while simultaneously making it clear she was listening to every word. She adjusted her lawn ornaments, straightened already perfect chair arrangements, and checked her solar lights, all while staying just close enough to overhear our conversation. "I will talk to her," Sheriff Miller said. "Maybe an official warning will convince her to move along." Their conversation was brief and unproductive. From where I stood, I could see Karen gesturing animatedly, showing Sheriff Miller the same website she had shown me, and pointing repeatedly toward the new development as if its existence somehow legitimized her presence on my property. The sheriff returned looking frustrated. "She is claiming she was told by someone in the development that this area was community land," he explained. "Says she has rights to camp here temporarily. I told her that is absolutely not the case, but she insists she needs formal eviction proceedings before she will leave." Over the next 3 days, the situation deteriorated further. Karen began making demands as if she were a legitimate tenant. She approached me while I was working near the barn, asking that I mow the area around her tent because the grass was too wild and possibly harboring ticks. When I refused, she complained that as the landowner, I had a responsibility to maintain safe conditions. Later that same day, she knocked on my front door, requesting access to my well water because her supply was running low. When I again refused, she claimed I was creating inhumane conditions for a lawful camper. The final straw came when she had the audacity to leave a handwritten note on my tractor seat asking me to refrain from using it before noon because the noise disrupts my meditation practice and work calls. The note was signed, "Your neighbor, Karen P." The next afternoon, Mrs. Abernathy from down the road stopped by unexpectedly. She seemed uncomfortable as she explained the reason for her visit. "I just wanted to ask if your cousin could please stop letting her dog run loose on my property," she said hesitantly. "The little thing has been digging in my vegetable garden." "My cousin?" I asked, confused. "Yes, the lady camping at the back of your property. She introduced herself as your cousin from the city, said you had given her permission to stay while she transitions to country living, said she was thinking of buying in the new development." My blood ran cold at the realization that Karen had been constructing an elaborate fiction for the neighbors, presumably to legitimize her presence if questions arose. She was not just trespassing now. She was actively lying about her relationship to me and my property. That evening, I drafted a formal written notice of trespassing, complete with a 24-hour deadline to vacate. I printed it on legal letterhead, included relevant state statutes about trespassing on private property, and walked it down to her campsite the following morning. Karen opened her tent flap before I even called out, as if she had been watching for me. I handed her the document without preamble. "This is a formal notice to vacate my property within 24 hours, I stated. "After that time, I will pursue all legal remedies available to remove you and your belongings." She glanced at the paper, her expression shifting from surprise to contempt. Then, making eye contact with me the entire time, She made a great show of tearing the notice into tiny pieces, letting them flutter to the ground like confetti. "I know my rights," she stated coldly, "and I am not going anywhere." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing my options. The legal route clearly would take too long and appeared to be exactly what Karen expected. She seemed well-versed in how to exploit the slow wheels of justice, perhaps having done this before. I considered calling friends to help physically remove her belongings, but that could potentially lead to trespassing charges against us if she called the police. I needed a legitimate, legal way to reclaim my property. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID displayed Chief Rodriguez. I answered immediately, welcoming the distraction. "Hey there," came the familiar voice of Fire Chief Miguel Rodriguez. "Just calling with the usual heads up about our spring training exercise. We are looking at the last weekend of this month if that still works for you." The routine call about the upcoming live burn training exercise suddenly took on new significance as Chief Rodriguez continued. "We will set up the temporary structure in the back field, same area as last spring's exercise. That clearing about 50 yards from the tree line works perfectly for us." I felt a strange calm settle over me as I realized he was describing the exact location where Karen had established her increasingly permanent camp. The training was a crucial safety exercise where firefighters would practice in a controlled environment with real flames in a purpose-built temporary structure. "Let me go over the details with you again, just as a refresher," Chief Rodriguez continued. "We will bring in the prefab wooden panels on Thursday to construct the training structure. The actual burn will happen Saturday morning starting around 6 a.m. We have all the county permits in place, and we will have the standard safety team on site the entire time." As Chief Rodriguez detailed the permits already secured and the safety protocols in place, I found myself nodding along, mentally mapping the exercise boundaries that completely encompassed Karen's illicit campsite. "So does that timing still work for you?" he asked. "We can adjust if you need us to." "No, that timing is perfect," I replied. "The usual arrangement works fine. Nothing has changed on my end." I was not being deceitful, merely prioritizing information. The training exercise had been scheduled months ago, long before Karen appeared. "Great," Chief Rodriguez said. "We appreciate you letting us use your land for this. It really helps with our training program, especially for the new recruits. Controlled burns in a safe environment are the best way to prepare them for the real thing." After ending the call, I sat at my kitchen table, contemplating my options while watching through the window as Karen strung yet more decorative lights around what she clearly now considered her territory. The fire department training was still 2 weeks away, which gave me ample time to continue pursuing legal channels for her removal. The ethical question nagged at me. Should I warn Karen about the upcoming exercise? The fire department would certainly discover her presence when they arrived to set up, and they would require her to move for safety reasons. But if she refused to acknowledge their authority, as she had the sheriff's, they might be forced to cancel or relocate the training. That would impact the preparedness of our local emergency services and inconvenience the volunteers who protected our community. On the other hand, if I told her now, she would likely dismiss it as an invented excuse to make her leave. Given her pattern of behavior, she might even escalate her claim on the property, knowing I had a deadline to remove her. She had already proven herself impervious to reason and legal notices. I decided on a middle path. I would continue pursuing legal eviction through proper channels. If those efforts succeeded, the issue would be resolved before the fire department arrived. If not, I would inform Chief Rodriguez of the situation when they came to mark the training area the week before the exercise. As professionals, they would handle the safety concerns appropriately. I finished my coffee and rose from the table. Through the window, I could see Karen arranging solar landscape lights along what she had apparently decided was her walkway from the tent to her portable toilet. She moved with the confidence of someone who believed they had found a clever loophole, a way to claim what was not rightfully theirs. But if legal efforts failed, nature, or rather, a controlled burn would take its course. The fire department training would happen as scheduled, with or without Karen's cooperation. And if she chose not to heed official warnings from uniformed firefighters, the consequences would be entirely of her own making. The legal wheels turned with excruciating slowness. I filed the formal eviction paperwork with the county the morning after my call with Chief Rodriguez. The clerk informed me that under normal circumstances, a hearing would be scheduled within 10 days. However, due to the backlog in the system, it could be 3 weeks or longer before my case was heard. 3 weeks, I asked, not bothering to hide my frustration. She could establish squatters' rights by then. The clerk gave me a sympathetic look. I understand your concern, sir, but Judge Wilson is out on medical leave, and Judge Perez is only handling cases 2 days a week. We are doing the best we can with limited resources. I left the courthouse feeling defeated. The fire department training would occur before my case even made it to a judge's desk. Meanwhile, each day that passed saw Karen growing more comfortable and more entitled on my property. 3 days after I filed the paperwork, Sheriff Miller drove out to serve Karen with the official trespass papers. I watched from a distance as he handed her the documents. She accepted them with a smirk, scanning the contents before pulling a folder from her tent and filing them away. The folder was labeled "Baseless Threats" in neat handwriting. The message was clear. She had done this before and was not intimidated by legal notices. The following morning, a county code enforcement officer appeared at my door, clipboard in hand. He looked uncomfortable as he explained the reason for his visit. "We received multiple complaints about code violations on this property," he said, consulting his clipboard. "The complaints include dangerous farm equipment left unsecured, improper waste disposal, unauthorized burning of trash, and several other items." He looked up apologetically. "I have to investigate any complaint we receive." I invited him to inspect the property, knowing there were no violations to find. As we walked, he admitted that all the complaints had come from the same person, filed online within minutes of each other. He did not need to tell me who that person was. "Some people use the code enforcement system as a weapon when they have disputes with neighbors," he said as he signed off on his clipboard, finding no violations. "Unfortunately, we have to follow up on every complaint, which takes resources away from actual problems." The message was clear. Karen was escalating. She was not just refusing to leave. She was now actively retaliating against me for attempting to remove her. As the days passed, her campsite grew more elaborate. She added a small garden area, complete with potted plants arranged in a circle. She brought in gravel to create a pathway. She posted her own private property sign facing my house, as if claiming that section of my land as her exclusive domain. A week before the scheduled fire training, a team from the fire department arrived to mark out the training zone. They used their characteristic orange stakes and bright yellow caution tape to outline the area where the temporary structure would be built and the surrounding safety perimeter. The markings encompassed Karen's entire campsite and extended 20 feet beyond it in all directions. From my vantage point on the back porch, I watched as Karen emerged from her tent after the fire department team left. She surveyed their work, walking the perimeter they had marked, then returned to her tent. Minutes later, she emerged with garden shears and systematically began removing every marker that came within 20 feet of her encampment. She collected the stakes and tape in a pile, then carried them to the edge of my property and threw them into the underbrush. The next morning, I decided direct confrontation was necessary. I printed out the official fire department training schedule, complete with county permits and safety protocols, and walked directly to her campsite. Karen was sitting in a folding chair outside her tent, typing on a laptop. She looked up as I approached, her expression immediately guarded. "This is not a trick or threat," I explained, showing her the official fire department letterhead. "In exactly 5 days, the fire department will be conducting a live burn training exercise right here. They will build a temporary structure and set it on fire under controlled conditions. This is dangerous. You need to leave." Karen glanced at the paper, barely giving it a moment of consideration. Then she fixed me with a patronizing smile. "How convenient that there is suddenly a fire drill scheduled exactly where I am camping," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Do I look stupid to you? I was not born yesterday. This is just another sad attempt to frighten me away." She handed the schedule back to me. "Nice try, but I am staying right here." "This is not a joke," I insisted. "This training has been scheduled for months. The fire department will be here in 5 days to build a structure, and they will set it on fire as part of their training. It is dangerous to be anywhere near it." "Right," she said, drawing out the word. "And I am sure they just happen to be building it right where I am camping. What a coincidence." She turned her back and walked into her tent, the universal signal that our conversation was over. I stood there, warning in hand, witness to a level of willful blindness that defied comprehension. I had tried legal channels. I had involved the sheriff. I had provided direct, explicit warning about the legitimate danger she would face if she remained. Each attempt had been met with escalating defiance. As I walked back to my house, I made a decision. I would inform Chief Rodriguez about the situation when his team arrived to begin construction. Karen had been given every opportunity to leave voluntarily and every warning about the consequences of staying. Whatever happened now was entirely her responsibility. The morning of the training exercise arrived crisp and clear. I had been up since before dawn, too anxious to sleep. At precisely 5:30 a.m., the rumble of diesel engines broke the pre-dawn silence as 3 fire trucks navigated carefully across my field. The convoy included 2 standard engines and the department's equipment truck, their red emergency lights casting an eerie glow in the early morning darkness. Firefighters in standard uniforms, not yet in their heavy gear, spilled out and began unloading lumber, tools, and safety equipment with practiced efficiency. Chief Rodriguez spotted me on the porch and walked over, thermos in hand. "Morning," he said, offering me a cup of coffee from his thermos. "Perfect conditions today. Light wind, good visibility. Should be a textbook training session." I accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "There is something you should know," I began, but before I could continue, a commotion from the tree line caught our attention. From my vantage point on the porch, coffee in hand, I watched as Karen emerged from her tent, hair disheveled, clearly annoyed by the early morning commotion. She wore pajama pants and a sweatshirt, evidently having just woken up. Her irritation transformed into visible confusion as she observed the methodical construction already underway and the dozen firefighters moving purposefully around her campsite. Chief Rodriguez stared in disbelief. "Is that someone camping on your property, right where we are setting up?" I quickly explained the situation, her unauthorized arrival, her refusal to leave despite multiple warnings, and my unsuccessful legal attempts to remove her. I tried to warn her about today, I concluded. Showed her the training schedule. She thought I was making it up to scare her off. Chief Rodriguez shook his head in disbelief, then straightened his shoulders. I will handle this, he said firmly, heading toward Karen's campsite. Even from a distance, I could read his body language as he approached her, professional but authoritative. He gestured toward the construction, then back to her tent, clearly explaining the danger. Karen's posture remained defiant, arms crossed tightly across her chest, head shaking in stubborn denial. Their conversation grew animated. Karen pointed repeatedly at her campsite, then at me on the porch, clearly trying to convince Chief Rodriguez that this was all an elaborate scheme to remove her. The chief remained calm but firm, pointing to the official county permits he held and the training exercise already in progress around them. The construction continued unabated while they talked. The firefighters had brought prefabricated wall panels that they were rapidly assembling into a room-sized structure approximately 30 yards from Karen's tent. Other team members were unrolling fire hoses and setting up water supply lines from the trucks to the exercise area. The operation had the smooth choreography of a well-rehearsed procedure. Chief Rodriguez returned to the porch, looking frustrated but determined. She refuses to believe this is a legitimate training exercise, he reported. Says you orchestrated this whole thing to drive her off your land. He shook his head. I showed her the permits, explained the county-approved training schedule, but she is convinced it is all fake. What now? I asked. We proceed with the training, he said firmly. But I cannot allow her to remain in the danger zone. Once we begin the live fire portion, that entire area becomes a restricted safety zone. If she will not leave voluntarily, I will have to call the sheriff to remove her for her own safety and for the safety of my team. As we spoke, the training structure neared completion. It was a simple but sturdy wooden room, designed to withstand enough heat and flame to provide realistic training conditions while remaining controllable. Around it, firefighters had cleared a safety perimeter and were now positioning their equipment for optimal access. It was only when the firefighters began donning their full turnout gear, heavy protective coats, pants, boots, and helmets, and rolling out additional hoses that I saw Karen's demeanor change. The color drained from her face as realization finally penetrated her wall of denial. This was not a bluff. This was not an intimidation tactic. This was a real fire department preparing for a real training exercise with real fire. What followed was a chaotic scramble as she began tearing down her campsite with none of the careful organization she had shown when setting it up. The precisely arranged chairs, tables, and decorative elements were haphazardly thrown into her SUV. The tent collapsed partially as she struggled to dismantle it alone, clearly having never done so in haste. Personal belongings were stuffed into bags without sorting. Solar lights were yanked from the ground with dirt still attached, and her portable toilet was left behind entirely as she prioritized speed over completeness. The firefighters continued their preparations, now giving her campsite a wide professional berth. A few offered assistance, which she angrily rejected. Chief Rodriguez stationed 2 of his team nearby, not to help but to ensure she did not injure herself in her panic or interfere with the training preparations. The first wisps of smoke began to rise from the training structure as firefighters set small preparatory fires inside. Karen gave up on properly dismantling her tent and simply yanked it from the ground, poles and all, stuffing the unwieldy mass into her already overflowing SUV. Without a backward glance, Karen's vehicle fishtailed across my field, leaving deep ruts in its wake. fleeing the scene of her humiliation with seconds to spare before the controlled burn reached its full intensity. Flames licked the sky where Karen's illicit campsite had stood just hours before. The firefighters moved with practiced precision around the controlled burn, their training proceeding exactly as planned despite the morning's unexpected drama. Teams took turns entering the structure in full gear, practicing rescue techniques and fire suppression methods under the watchful eyes of their instructors. I remained on my porch, watching the exercise with renewed appreciation for these volunteers who put themselves at risk to protect our community. The irony was not lost on me that the very training Karen had dismissed as fictional might one day save her life or property. As the exercise concluded and the teams began their cleanup, neighbors began to appear, drawn by both the smoke and the irresistible scent of controversy. News travels fast in small communities, and several had witnessed Karen's hasty departure or heard about it through the rural grapevine. Mrs. Abernathy arrived with a basket of fresh muffins for the firefighters, her curiosity barely contained. After distributing her baked goods, she made her way to my porch. "So she finally left," she observed, settling into the chair beside me. "Not a moment too soon from what I hear." "You know about her?" I asked. Mrs. Abernathy nodded vigorously. "She tried the same thing with the Hendersons last summer," she revealed, shaking her head. "Claimed their south pasture was unused land and she was establishing residency." As other neighbors gathered, more stories emerged. Karen, it seemed, had made a habit of targeting rural properties, attempting to exploit adverse possession laws or simply bullying owners into allowing her extended stays. The Wilsons had found her camping in their backwoods. The Johnsons had discovered her setting up in their fallow field. Each time, she had used the same tactics, claiming misunderstanding, then citing obscure regulations, then simply refusing to leave until forced. "She targets properties where she thinks the owners do not have the knowledge or resources to fight back," explained Bill Henderson. "She tried telling us we had abandoned our south pasture because we had not planted it for 2 seasons, said that made it available for public use." 2 weeks later, Sheriff Miller delivered the news that Karen had been cited for criminal trespass and interference with emergency services equipment when she removed the fire department markers. The citations came with substantial fines, and a court date she would not be able to avoid by simply moving to a new location. "The fire chief's report was the deciding factor," Sheriff Miller explained. "Tampering with safety equipment is taken very seriously, especially when it involves emergency services training. The deep ruts her hasty departure left in my field required significant work to repair. The spring rains had turned them into miniature trenches that threatened to expand with each downpour. I spent several days with my tractor, filling and grading, reseeding the torn earth. She had also left behind her portable toilet, which required professional removal, and numerous smaller items, tent stakes, trash, and bizarrely, most of her garden gnome collection. But as I ran the tiller over the last of the ruts, I felt an unexpected sense of satisfaction. The land, like its owner, had proven resilient. Within weeks, fresh grass would cover all evidence of Karen's occupation, erasing her attempt to claim what was not hers. That evening, I hosted an impromptu barbecue for the fire department and neighbors whose warnings and support had helped me stand firm. As twilight settled over the property that had been in my family for generations, conversation and laughter filled the air. Chief Rodriguez raised his glass in a toast. "To good neighbors," he said, "who look out for each other and respect the land." As I looked around at these people who understood the value of community and respect for boundaries, I realized that the real protection against those who would take what is not theirs comes not from laws or locks, but from communities that recognize and defend what matters. The backfield now stood empty again, ready for next season's training exercise, though I suspected that news of this year's event would discourage uninvited campers for years to come. Sometimes the most effective deterrent is not a fence or a posted sign, but a simple story passed from neighbor to neighbor about the day. A trespasser was forced to flee from the very spot she had tried to claim, driven out not by legal papers or threats, but by the simple, undeniable reality of fire department training day.